France, and I'm the host of Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. I'm here with a very special guest today, Marnie Swedberg, with a pre-recording of a show that will be airing in August. So this will be live as I'm talking now. Marnie, you and I have just recorded this sneak peek, and I'm so excited now to jump into the meat of what you are and what you offer to everyone you interact with. Welcome to the studio, Marnie.
Oh, thanks, Wade. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, in the sneak peek, as you know, I was moved to tears because of your approach and the immediate impact it had on me, and making a little course correction in my own life based on having had the privilege and honor of interacting with you. So I want to know where that comes from. And our audience will want to know what molded and shaped you. I think it was Jeremiah that said, "You knew me in the womb." God has a purpose for each and every one of us, and he is crafting jewels that he will make up when he makes up his jewels. Each one of us under pressure and different elements going into forming the kind of jewel, the kind of treasure that we are. So I want to know what molded and shaped you, the circumstances of your origin story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I had the rare privilege of being born into a family where the mom and dad loved God, loved each other, and loved us kids. And I have 3 sisters, and we are still, as adults, just best friends and all walking very closely with Christ. My dad and mom were both just God-loving people. I just love and appreciated them so much. But my dad was just an amazing dad. He was just a super loving dad. And I remember even as a teenager, he'd sit me on his lap and he'd talk to me with me on his lap. And he was just this guy who would just do anything. I remember being little, and sometimes on a Saturday morning, he'd be whispering in my ear to wake me up, "Come here. Let's go out for breakfast. We'll sneak away." And I thought it was just me, Wade, but he was doing it with all my sisters too. From time to time, he'd just take turns, And this was the kind of father that I grew up with. I remember later in life, one day praying with God and just talking to him about how he was so much like my dad. And I loved it that God was so compassionate and so personal and so involved in everything in my life. And God prompted in my heart, "Oh, Marnie, I'm so much better than your dad." And I thought, wow, I suppose, right? But because I had this amazingly loving father, I had an advantage over those of you who are listening who had a bad dad or an absentee dad. And I think that that's why I have this very sweet and precious relationship with God, because since I was little, I've seen God at least as good as my own dad. And so there's so much confidence and trust there with God. In my book, Flow Through Vessel, I have a whole section in there about trust and how come we don't trust God more. And it's because other people in authority in our lives have proven to us that people in authority can't be trusted. And so we apply that to God too. So because I had a good, loving father who modeled good authority in my life, I was able to kind of walk into this relationship with God where I'm just like a little child with him, and I trust him, and we just have conversations, and he's interested in everything about me, and I'm interested in everything about him. And that's just kind of how we roll. So I feel like that was a huge foundational piece for me. But then when I got into school, I started school at 4 years old. And I literally never really learned how to read until I graduated from high school. I failed my way through school, just struggling so hard. Dyslexia, just all kinds of trouble that at that time there were no words for, no treatment for, no help for. And so just kind of failed my way through. And that was really hard. So for me now to have written 14 books and to provide other writers with writers training programs and things like that is just so incredible to me that God can use anything. And then I think the other thing I want to kind of just loop into here before I pass it back to you, but our lives are such a mix of things, right? It's good, it's bad, it's hard, it's up, it's down. And there's a teaching in our culture right now that talks about how everything that's in your life, you have caused it. You are the only thing that matters. What you think is what determines your life. And I say, well, that's true to a point. to a point, that's true. But then you've got all the other things that you have no control over, like hurricanes or world wars or the US economy. I mean, you just don't have all control.
Or what any other human being on the earth does.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's good as far as it goes, but it's too harsh. So I have lived through so many hard things. And one of the things was my parents had come up to visit us in northern Minnesota. They lived 8 hours south in Minneapolis, and they came up to visit us for a week, and they were there. And my dad was helping us in the store and everything. And then they went back down to Minneapolis, and that was on a Saturday. Then we drove down to Minneapolis on a Sunday, 8 hours south. Then we drove down on a Sunday. We were going to go have supper at their house on Monday night. And we had a buyer's show. So on Monday, we were at the buyer's show. I came out into the hallway. I had missed a call. It was like a big Quonset thing. And I had missed a call while we were in there. And I took the message, and it just said, "Marnie, your dad is dead." That was the whole message. And a lady was standing right beside me. She goes, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And I said, "I don't think so." And my husband came right behind there. And he's like, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, if this is correct, my dad is passed. I don't understand how that could be," because he was just Mr. Energy, just the week before. And so I thought maybe he was out biking and got hit by a car or something, So we got started out toward the van. And at that moment, Wade, I as you can hear from how I've been talking, I was a daddy's girl. I was totally a daddy's girl. And this was absolutely the worst news ever. And we start walking to the van, and I can hardly breathe. And I just did what I usually do. I just kicked into my own 911, which is just Jesus, 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 Jesus. And that's the only thought that I could pull up was just Jesus, 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 Jesus. We had less than a 5-minute walk from the building out to our car. And on the way, before we got there, I stopped still, and I looked at my husband, and I said, "You know what?" And this was something that God gave me as a gift. I said, "You know what? If my dad is really dead, then he got exactly what he asked for. It's not what I want, but it's what he wanted." And Wade, I can remember all growing up, him and his 4 girls, no boys. And he would always say, "I don't want to grow old and become a burden to you girls. If I had boys, it'd be different, but you girls will be different. You'll have your own families. Your husbands will be busy with their families. And I don't want to be a burden to you." So when my dad passed away suddenly at 72 years old, it was the worst hit that I'd ever taken. But God softened the blow in the moment. As I called and cried out to him, he softened the blow, and he took me through so many levels of grief right then in that moment that I still grieved and missed my dad, but nothing like I would have without him intervening to help me see that while I didn't get what I wanted, my dad got what he wanted, and God was pleased. So I feel like this relationship with God, coming to him as a child in faith, changes everything about everything.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Just amazing. Just love sitting, listening to it, drinking it in, reflecting on it, applying it to my own circumstances in my own life. I have a couple of questions to help round this story out. So your parents, where did they come from?
Yeah, well, physically, they came from tiny Tripp, South Dakota, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and they met there. My father's mother had died when he was 5 years old. She had never been really there. She had tuberculosis, so she was in an asylum since he was 2. His older sisters raised him. His father was an alcoholic and died before I got to know him. And so he came from a very kind of pretty dysfunctional, although beautiful family, but pretty dysfunctional. And he met my mom when they were in high school. And my mother's parents adopted him basically as a teenage boy who didn't really have a strong family like hers. They just kind of took him in, and mom and dad fell in love as teenagers and got married. And my dad was going to be a pastor, and he went to Bible school for a year, and it just wasn't a good fit. And so he went into business. So he was always a businessman, but with a pastor's heart. So I grew up going to Bible studies with my daddy and singing with my daddy and going on bus ministry with my daddy. And, I was just always with dad. And we just had this wonderful relationship, but mostly his heart was to help people know the Jesus who had saved his life.
Yeah. Awesome. That's an amazing story. So the other question I had was, during that time when you were failing your way through
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
how did that affect your relationship with your dad at that time, or did it?
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard because, and my older sister and I've talked about this. So she's more like a valedictorian person, and things came very easily to her. And she would get her report card and go into mom and dad's room first. We would have meetings in mom and dad's bedroom. That's the thing. So she'd go in and she'd get all the hugs and stars and kisses and all that. And then she'd come out and she knew she watched how I studied, and she watched how I tried harder than her sometimes, a lot of times. And I would get poor grades, and I would go in and I would get the consequences, and I would get the discipline, and I would get the, basically you got to try harder, and you
The
just got to
tough
work.
love.
The
You
tough
got
love, right?
she got the wonderful love. You got the
Yes.
tough love.
Exactly. We've talked about it, as adults, how she felt, so terrible about it. I felt terrible about it. Yeah, it was tough, but I think the one thing that God has done with me through the deep spiritual healing that all of us need as adults is to go back through some of those pain points and let him speak to us there. And what I just have so much confidence that my parents were absolutely doing the best they knew how. And
Yeah.
you, as a parent listening to me in this moment, you're doing the best you know how, and you're not doing perfect. None of us are doing perfect, but we have a God who can help us, who can help our children. And I'm thankful to my children for forgiving me for things that I didn't do perfectly. I'm so happy that I get to forgive my parents for things that they didn't do perfectly. But those were, and this is maybe the point that you were trying to get at. How does a relationship work when we feel like it's unfair? Like when we feel like someone isn't understanding us, like we're unloved, misunderstood, unseen, just challenged in that way. And the way that the relationships still go forward is because there's an underlying level there that's deeper than whatever's happening in this moment. There's an underlying trust level that no matter what happens, I know you're going to love me. No matter what is going on in this moment, I know where home is. Like the prodigal son, no matter how bad it gets, I know where home is. And that's how we're supposed to be with God. No matter how bad it looks, we know where home is. And no matter how we think he's failed us, we know where home is. And we know that he's right. He's right. He's always right. And so we just keep running back into the open arms of this loving Father.
So true. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And every word resonates. We run summer camp programs, not just summer. We have a spring, summer, fall, and winter camp. We target the growing season. We have experiential leadership. We have companion gardening. We're doing a ton of things for particularly 11 to 15-year-olds, but we've got the graduates at 16, 17, 18 who come as junior guides and whatnot. And we have many themes, be the change that you want to see in the world. But also one of the themes that I always hit upon a couple of times is, hey, life is not fair, and that is fair.
Well, and
because
I think
we talked in the sneak peek about in the they that loved God spoke often one to another, and he says, I will remember them in the day that I make up my jewels. And jewels are created under pressure, heat, and there are different minerals and even impurities that go in to crafting the different colors. And different types of jewels have different colorings based on the quote impurities unquote that are present at the time of their shaping. And each of us is being utterly uniquely handcrafted by God, who is controlling or allowing all of those circumstances.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to a break, and that commercial break is going to feature a video for your book, Flow Through Vessel. And the video will speak for itself. But when we come back, we'll talk about how all these experiences shaped you for your life's work and that which you are doing right now. So don't go anywhere after this short commercial break. We will be right back with more Marnie Swedberg.
God down, maybe letting yourself down, not measuring up. Hi, my name is Marnie Swedberg. I wrote the book Flow Through Vessel, How to Master the Habit of Letting God Flow Through You. In God's economy, we simply cannot give something we don't have. If I don't have peace, I can't give it to you. If I don't have money, I can't give it to you. But what God wants to do is he wants to flow good stuff to us. We get to enjoy it and then through us. And our lives are like a cup. If you think about it, we say things like, they suck me dry. I'm all out of gas. I got nothing left to give. But what we're supposed to do is, instead of trying to come up with what's in the glass, we're supposed to stay submerged into Jesus, let Jesus fill our lives. And then when others suck on our lives, that's who they get. Grab the Flow Through book bundle. Right now it's for free over at Marnie.com. You get the ebook in a download version, worksheets plus a song. I'll see you over there.
And host of Created in the Image of God. I'm here in the recording studio with Marnie Swedberg for a special pre-recorded show. And we've just had an amazing conversation. You've just seen the video for Marnie's amazing book. Tell us how all those experiences that you had growing up led to the writing of this book, and also share how you got into writing in your first book and that whole journey, especially since you shared that if you missed the opening segment, go back and watch it because you need to hear the whole context. But Marnie, you shared that you had trouble even learning to read, even well into high school, and yet now you're this amazing author helping others write. How did that transformation come about?
Right. I think I think that there's so many things good that comes from every challenge that we have in our life. So I like to use the diving board analogy. When you go out to the end of a diving board, if you just stand there and then you plop into the water, you get one kind of a splash. But if you do that jump up and down thing a little bit, you get a whole different level of entry into the water. You get a big splash. And sometimes the harder something is in life, I think, okay, the farther down that diving board's going, and it's going to send me up higher into the arms of God and down into the world with a bigger splash. And so instead of looking at these hardships as something that's horrible and you just can't tolerate them, you just can look at them and say, God's getting ready to do something big. And so when you're going through a hard time, no matter how long it is, no matter how hard it is or confusing, just remember, the harder it is, probably the bigger the splash it's going to make when God brings you out the other side. So
let me just interject. I want to hear the rest of the story about the writing, but I've got to share, I have written my own trilogy, and throughout that trilogy, I use the analogy of the gangplank. Now, this is a different twist on this same thing. Yep. The gangplank is we must walk forward in faith. The problem is we don't actually want to take the next step. We don't usually take it because we perceive sharks in the water.
Yes.
And until there's a pirate at our back with a sword in our back forcing us to walk the plank, we don't take that next step, right? We don't want to, we're fearful, we lack courage, or we're lazy, or we're just comfortable, right? We don't want to take the next step to become that which God wants us to become. And at some point in time, God will provide us the opportunity to grow and walk off the edge of that gangplank. And I love mixing that with your diving board analogy. Get to the end of the gangplank, take a couple of jumps, make a bigger splash as you go off it.
And sometimes life just does the jumps for you. It's not like we go looking for trouble. It's just sometimes trouble is. But another analogy that comes to me, and for years I felt like because of how I learned to read, not really until I was an adult very well, I felt like what would happen just repeatedly in my life then as an adult is that God would throw me into the deep end of a pool, like into the 12-foot end of a pool. And I didn't even know how to swim in this pool. And I would just barely be able to like flail and dog paddle around to get my head above the water. And then I could maybe get to the side. And then what would happen is I'd learn to, just go a little bit in this pool. And finally I'd get to learn some strokes. And finally I'd be swimming laps. And then I could teach other people how to do that. And that's what my life has really been like. If you would just say, that's just experience after experience. Like womenspeakers.com which is the largest online directory of its kind in the world. When I started that, all I had was a blue clickable US map in my head. That's all I knew. I knew nothing. And we took that all the way up to now close to 1,700 speakers and thousands of planners and gals traveling all over the world. So when I was walking with God, he'd throw me into the deep end of another pool. Now you're going to write a book. Now you're going to run some summits. Now you're going to do this. Now you're going to travel all the way around the world all by yourself. Now you're going to do all this. Every time I'd get into the deep end of the pool, Wade, I would feel like I was drowning, and I would feel kind of hostile toward God. Like, where are you? Where are you? But I came to see it differently. I came that as I grew up in my faith and my trust in God, I came to see that not only was he the one that was throwing me in the deep end of a pool, but he himself was in the pool with his arms open to catch me. And all that flailing around was me not trusting him. And as soon as
that image of every parent who's standing in the pool saying, come on, jump, 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 and the kid doesn't want to jump.
Exactly.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
But then when we realized that, okay, now we're in the deep end of the pool, but we're okay. Is it still a little scary? Yeah, because we have to trust, right? But this is the relationship God is calling us adults with. Oh, I like to say it this way. I'd be more responsible. I'd be more faithful to God. I'd be more faithful if it didn't feel so irresponsible.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah. I mean, to walk off the end of that gangplank,
right,
to jump in the deep end. All of that feels like just you're being an idiot. But my older sister has a phrase that I learned years ago. And she says it this way: I'd rather look like a fool than miss an opportunity to be used by God.
Wow. So powerful. So how old were you, or what was the phase in your life when you wrote your first book, and what was that first book?
I was in my 30s, and of course I was never going to write a book. I could barely read books. Once I became an adult and was out from under the pressure of school, my mind actually was freed up enough that I began to read. And once I started to read, I read everything. Like I just read, trying to catch up, I think. But then I was in my 30s, and we were hosting. It was kind of a unique situation. We lived in a town of 1,200 people. Like at that time, there weren't Walmarts, but when there became Walmarts, the closest one was 2.5 hours away. So we were out in the middle of nowhere. We were up on the Canadian border in the middle, that little hook up at the top of Minnesota. So we were in the middle of nowhere. We happened to buy a house in town there, went to church in town, but most of the people that attended our church lived out in the surrounding area, out in the country. And so because we had a decent sized house, it wasn't huge, but it was decent. And because we had a house in town, a lot of times when they had board meetings or baby showers or bridal showers or women's ministry meetings or missionaries in town to entertain or whatever, it was our house. And so we were entertaining, at that time, we were entertaining over 100 guests per month. And I was averaging a cost of serving meals that averaged 50 cents per meal. Now, this is a long time ago, but still, that was very cheap even then to entertain people. And people kept asking me for recipes, and they kept asking me, how are you doing this? And like that. And I decided I needed to find it, because I was sitting down with people and going through everything I was doing to make all this happen, but I didn't have time. So I went to the library, and I interlibrary loaned over 100 books about how to run a kitchen, a home kitchen, how to manage your kitchen. And as I was reading through these 100 books that came in, I thought for sure I would find somebody who was doing what I was doing, but nobody was. And along the way, I read some books that were really, really poorly written, Wade. I mean, it was like, as I read them, not to be critical, but just, I was like, boy, I think I could even do better than that, So by the time I was done with this, I realized I really need to write this down. Enough people were asking me. I didn't have time to explain it. So I spent 4 years writing it and getting it published with St. Martin's Press in New York. And so the first book I wrote was Kitchen Shortcuts. That's the Marnie's Kitchen Shortcuts. That was my first book. And everything else kind of came after that. So yeah, it was not something I was ever going to do. I remember my editor at the time saying, you have more books in you. And I was like, I really don't think so. I think you got all I've got. This is the best I can get. Now 14 books. So just never say never, right?
Well, and this brings up another question I forgot to ask. Where are you in the birth order of your sisters?
I'm second out of 4.
Okay. And then where is flow through vessel in the birth order of your books?
It is number one. No. Flow through vessel is not number one. Flow through vessel, I'm gonna guess it might be 11. Yeah, not exactly sure.
Yeah. So what's special about flow through vessel that we're offering that on today's show?
Flow through vessel is so important because it's where most Jesus lovers really get lost, is here in this particular how it's supposed to be. So I'm going to talk about the 4 R's in a minute, but I want to start with the analogy of a cup. So we all think that this is our lives, and when people come and drink on our lives, whether they need help or money or whatever we have to give, we're supposed to come up with this, and then they drink on our lives. And we know that this is how we think about it because we use phrases like, they sucked me dry, I ran out of gas, I've got nothing left to give. So we use phrases that show us that this is how we're actually seeing it, that we have the capacity to hold just so much, and when we run out, we're out. So how it's really supposed to be, Wade, is that our lives are like the cup or the container, and that we are the straw. We are the straw. And that when people suck on our lives, they're going to get whatever we're submerged in. So if I am full of Jesus and submerged in him, when someone sucks on my life, that's what they get, is they get Jesus. But when I am out of Jesus, when I'm submerged in myself, what they get is they get the best I can give, or they get toxicity wherever I'm at that day. That's what they're going to get. And it really changes it for us to recognize it's not my job to come up with all the good stuff that I'm supposed to be sharing in the world. It's my job to stay submerged in Jesus and then let him flow through. So that's totally different than coming up with everything everybody needs.
Right. Rivers of living water.
Yeah. So then in the book, Flow Through Vessel, we go into trust, we go into habits, because we have the habit of not being a flow through vessel. We have the habit of actually looking to ourselves and looking to others before we ever look to God. And we know this because when we get an ear infection, do we typically go to God first, or do we typically go to the doctor first? When, I remember one day I was early pregnant. I was caring for somebody else's kids for a few hours while she was off doing something else. And I had all the kids out in the backyard. I went in the house a minute, and as I came out, I slipped on the stairs and fell hard. And I was afraid I was losing the baby. And so I went in and I tried to call her. I tried to call a nurse friend. I tried to call another person. Nobody was available. And I finally looked up and I said, well, then I'll just have to talk to you. And why do we wait? Why don't we go to Jesus first? It's because we're in the habit since we were 2 years old of doing it my way. Me, do it my way. And this habit is hard to break for us to actually say, no, I don't want to do it my way anymore. I want Jesus to flow through me.
Well, and this is why in the sneak peek recording, I got tears in my eyes. I mean, there's a whole host of things, and this show isn't about me. My audience knows, enough about my story to correlate. I don't have to share it again here. But this morning, during the summer, I'm trying to have breakfast with my 16-year-old daughter on the days where I'm home alone with her. Mom is home 2 days, and I work from home every day. So when she's at work 3 days, I'm there. And during breakfast, we also talk about chores that have to get done because you've got responsibility of the family. And of course, she's driving now at 16, and there's also this boundary setting going on, right? And I'm dealing with that. And, it's my last couple of years to try to give her the guidance that's needed, within the guardrails. I mean, she's got a lot of freedom, way more than I had at 16. And of course, I would sneak out and take my own freedoms in a wrong way. We want to set appropriate boundaries where none of that nonsense is happening. But it's so hard when you don't have the kind of loving family, as you mentioned earlier. And I will go into one thing here, because I don't know that I've shared this so much. When I was in the ministry full time, I resigned many years ago to separate my faith from my paycheck. I didn't like being told to teach things that I didn't necessarily believe. However, one of the things that I used to teach was what you said about God and how we view God based on how our physical father was. And there's this verse in which Paul says, the church, which is Jerusalem above, the mother of us all. So I began to use this analogy of God, our Father, and the church in a way is kind of like our mother. Now, he's not, because God is both a father and a mother to us, but our relationship to our church, our relationship to the religious organization that we affiliate with, whatever that is, we kind of may ascribe certain motherly aspects to that, because the mother's kind of like always there. She's more present. She's setting the sort of smaller layer of rules in the typical traditional patriarchal nuclear family. Of course, today there are a million different kinds of families. But my point being that however our father was, we may view God as being like that. And however our mother was, we may view the religious institution that we affiliate with as being like that. And so I've thought a lot about these things, but I think you have this way of more intuitively connecting directly with the reality of it, not through the filter of learning and knowledge, which is helpful, but it can also be a big veil. It can confuse and diffuse the reality of connecting directly with God. I'll stop there because I'm going off on multiple tangents, but I wanted to throw out some inputs and see how you respond to those.
Yeah, I think, my husband has a master's degree and I have, one college class. And so when we were dating, that was a concern for him. It's like, I'm not sure if we'll be able to do this, with the difference in the intellectual, levels there. And what was interesting though, is that with my childlike faith, comes a simplicity that allows me to more readily say yes to God. And I remember one time we were driving and we were listening to something, and then I said, you know what I think I'm supposed to do? And I told him something, I don't remember now. And he goes, Marnie, you're like, God just whispers and you just go running. He goes, me, God gets behind me and he pushes with both hands. It's kind of like the plank analogy, yep. Right? And I think, that I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the challenges I had as a child learning, because I think that I had to bypass the normal way of figuring life out. And I had to come up with a different way to do life than most people have to do it. And I think that led me into this very simplistic, I want to just give you 4 words. This is how life usually feels, I think, for most people. A bit impossible. Like it's too hard. Like I don't have enough or I'll never be enough. And like I just can't do it. But here's how it's supposed to be. When we do it God's way, it's totally possible. We do it with ease. There's plenty. And from God's perspective, it's already done.
Amen. Beautifully said. We're going to go to another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the impact of reality as you go out and you do your work, you write the books, the feedback you get, how you respond to what life is teaching you in the current moment as you go about your work, and how your work is transforming the world around you and how the world around you impacts the evolution of your work. I do want to share one little story before we go to break, based on what you just said. So this is one of my favorite stories. One of my very best college buddies, Dave, he had 4 boys. You came from a family of 4 boys. He had 4 boys, and Dave's the perfect father for 4 boys. I mean, I don't know if he would have been the perfect father for 4 girls, but he's the perfect father for 4 boys. And he tells me about his son. I think it might have been Michael. I can't remember which one. When Michael was about 4 and Dave was walking with him down the street, and there was some like trash on the street, and he told his son, Dave, why don't you just pick up that thing and put it in the trash? I mean, Michael didn't want to do it. And finally he did. And there's another one. And then they were walking, and then Michael got the idea and he picked up, and I said, look, doesn't this nicer now? And then Michael got excited and said, Dad, why don't we clean up the whole world? And Dave says, and I can't remember the full context if this was later or in the moment, but the way he tells the story, and I said, Michael, how about you start with your room? And Michael's response was, it's too hard.
Exactly.
And That's kind of the yin yang of what we're talking about here.
Yes.
You know, the whispering in the ear and running versus the push him off the end of the gangplank. And I'm a kind of like a chaotic mixture of both. Half the time I'm running off half-cocked following God, and the other half I'm like in this complex world of how it all has to work together to be successful.
Yeah.
So we're going to go now to that commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how you deal with that, and I can't wait to hear your answer to that. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Marnie Swedberg. In the Image of God, a pre-recorded show tonight with Marnie Swedberg, who soon to our guests will need no introduction. Marnie, I'm definitely going to want to invite you back. There's so much more here to unpack. But right before the break, we were talking about how you engaged with the world, the books you wrote, how you got there, that process. Now we want to talk about, okay, and what's the reaction been, and how is the world transforming around you as a result of your work, and how are you being transformed as the result of the world, interacting with you?
Well, that's like such a huge question. So I think I'm going to address numbers first, and then I'm going to go to heart. So how about if we do that? So I remember back in 2009, I had a world map on my office wall. And whenever I would have a new mentee or a new group or a new whatever, I would put a new pin on the map, and we were tracking numbers and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2009, I remember there came one day where God was like, it's time to take down the map and let it go. Just let it go. And I was like, oh, because, as a human, tracking numbers is just very exciting, right? It's very gratifying and it's exciting, and you don't lose track and all that. And so we took it down. At that time, I had mentored about 15,000 people from 35 countries back in 2009. So now I was on a plane ride then to go to a huge ministry. They were bringing us in to see if they could partner with us. And on the plane at that time, I was a homeschooling mom. We owned a restaurant that I managed. We owned a retail store that I managed. I was running womenspeakers.com, and I was still writing and speaking. So I was on the plane, and I was like, okay, so when they ask me, so describe what you do, what do I answer? What is my answer? Because the answer was so complex, and it was so confusing to people how to, manage all of this. And so it was just in my heart then on the plane, from now on, you're just a mentor to millions. Just go with that. And it was such a kind of a relief weight, and it felt a little imposterish at the time. I didn't have proof that I was, but if I counted the people I mentored and who their lives affected, I knew that I was. But sometimes God asks us to do something that's outside of our comfort zone, outside of who we see ourselves to be. And I have found this is the heart of it. I have found that the real pain, now there's always, okay, you start lifting weights, there's some pain going to happen there, right? Okay, as you develop those muscles. But the real pain comes between the ask and the commitment to say yes. That's where the real pain is. The real pain is the months or the weeks or whatever that it takes you to get to say, yes, I'm going to go to the gym. That's the real pain. And when it's with God, I just have come now that I get to say an advance, instant, joyous yes to him every single time. And this took years of having that be like, first it started with, I get to say yes to God every single time, and changing my phraseology from I want to, I should have, I could, I might, I really need to say yes to God every time, to just say I get to say yes to God everything. That changed everything for me. The next year, it was I get to say an instant joyous yes to God every single time. That changed everything radically again. In the following year, I get to, in advance, say an instant joyous yes to God every single time. And that has eliminated all of the real pain in my life. I still have pain in my life, but not that pain where we're between God, knowing that God is asking me to do something, and me deciding if I'm going to say yes.
Well, let me react to that right now, and maybe some of the audience is having the same reaction. So this past Sunday, we do this thing every Sunday in a assisted living facility. We've been doing it for over a year. We started with one person wanting us to come, and she said she wanted to develop a spiritual thing there. And now the whole facility embraces us, and people come in all the time, and it's just amazing. It's amazing. And we have people there, who are in wheelchairs with no legs. We have people there with diminishing mental capacity. We have people there with serious, health issues that they've got weeks to live. And we're there every Sunday morning with these people, and it's just amazing. And this past week, one of the core participants did this meditation exercise around putting your hand on your heart and just meditating and feeling the energy of God within, because God is out there, but he is also in us, and feeling the warmth and all that. So that's the backdrop to when you were talking. I was with you on the yes. I was with you on the immediate yes. And I'm envisioning how this creates momentum, right?
It's huge.
It creates momentum. But when you got to the advance yes, suddenly I felt this tightening.
Right.
Which is exactly what you're saying. The pain
That's
is
the pain.
right there. And the reason is, but wait a minute, I think this and I think that. And aren't we doing this and aren't we doing that? And I know that a yes to one thing means a no to something else.
Yes, that's right.
Right? And so, me, it's kind of shocking for me who thinks because I literally traveled the world. I mean, literally went around the world looking for God. Where are you actively working? And I started a foundation for homeless children in India, which ultimately collapsed. I was given a Lifetime Achievement Award for those efforts, but the story is that, and this is in my second book, but the story is that the tsunami hit in the Chennai area, and funds were diverted from the educational program that I was starting to the immediate humanitarian need, which of course Western standards don't allow. And so the donors lost faith in what they were wanting to build, and it just all collapsed. But the thing is, it taught me that no, you do need to work in your backyard, which is why we're now at the assisted living facility here locally, not over in India somewhere. But my point is, I literally traveled around the world saying, God, where are you actively working? Where are your people that I'm supposed to help? And of course, they're everywhere, but that was part of my journey. So it's funny that, and I said, I just threw myself on the global mosh pit and I did whatever, wherever to be engaged with God. Somebody who believes that about himself, to feel this tightening in my chest when you say instant future yes, it's a wake-up call.
Well, and all of you felt it at some point when I was talking. All of you had a resistance moment, whether it was when it got to joyous instant or whatever, or even saying yes to God every single time at all. I think all of us have, it's a journey. It's such a journey. And I'm not there yet. I'm not home free yet. Heaven will be that, but it's all a journey. And God wants
none of us are ever there.
The relationship is what God's after. The relationship.
Yeah. I also describe it as a tennis match where the ball is always in your court. You think you're waiting for God to serve the back ball, and there's like 100 balls littered at your feet, and God's waiting for you because he will instantly put the ball back in your court every time you take a step, every time you take a swing. You don't have to wait on God. God's waiting on you every second of every moment of every day. He'll go as fast as you humanly can.
One of my favorite phrases is just come on, sit on daddy's lap. Come sit on daddy's lap. And it's all about that trust level again. And for those of you who are really struggling with that trust level thing, I encourage you to get the book Flow Through Vessel. And in chapter 10, it's all about trust levels. There's a test in there actually to help you identify what trust level you're at today. Also, why you're at that trust level, because you'll be able to see where you're at and why. And then 6 months from now, you'll be able to take that test again. And just with the awareness change, you're going to see a change in your trust level. Just becoming aware of this. So that's the beauty with Christ. You know, that's the second thing. It's too hard. With God, it's done with ease. It's not easy, but it's not like climbing Mount Everest every day.
So we're actually at time on the literal clock, not on the show clock, because we got started a little bit late. I just wanted you to be aware in case you had something else planned. I just looked at my calendar. I can keep going to wrap this up. But
we can. We're good. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, awesome. So friends, that's because this is a pre-recorded version of the show. So this is so exciting. This conversation is amazing, and I can't wait to have you come back and continue this conversation. But I want to introduce something that I've reflected on recently and get your reaction to it. So I've spent a lot of time in the book of Genesis. I love the book of Genesis. I read it, I reflect it over and over and over again. I mine it for its richness. However, you then have to go and continue to read the story through Abraham, through Moses, through Joshua, and then on through the prophets, and then through John the Baptist and Jesus, and then on into the book of Revelation and the future things and the return of Jesus, to fully understand what on earth God is doing. But one of the things that came to me relatively recently that I've talked a couple of times about is that Cain and Abel really sets the stage, right? The firstborn son kills his brother. And this sets the stage for all of human evolution, the challenges that we face as a species, as individuals, and as a species. And what occurred to me is how Jesus flips the story of Cain and Abel on its head. And let me unpack this. When he tells the story of the prodigal son is Cain. He's the son who did not please God, who did not do what God wanted. The son who stayed with the father is Abel. But in the story of the prodigal son, Jesus flips the script and makes Abel the bad guy. And this is really interesting to reflect on in our relationships with human beings, because hopefully most of us are not murderers, right? And if you are, well, go and sin no more. That's all I can say, right? Even a murderer has hope in grace. But most of us are not murderers. So we can look at the Cain and Abel story from the term of, white and black hat, good guy, bad guy, villain. So when we get too comfortable with that, just like the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus flips the story about who's the good one, who's the bad one, because the Samaritans were always the ones that the Jews looked down on in that day. So does Jesus with the prodigal son. And now Abel is the jealous one who's jealous of the favor that Cain got. This helps us examine our relationship in a new and different way. So I just wanted to, this is part of why in this section, we're reflecting on, okay, you've got this work, you've written these books, now you're out engaging. What is the feedback? What are you learning as you further evolve your understanding through your direct relationship with God?
Well, I want to come back to Cain and Abel first. I have always said that if I were God, when Adam and Eve rejected me in the garden, I would have maybe been able to be okay with that. But when they started killing each other, that would have been the end for me. The whole process would have been done right there in that moment. That would have been the end. I could handle rejection myself, but I will not let you hurt each other. Right.
Right.
This loving God that we have is so patient, so kind. And while Abel was, in your analogy, while Abel was spared from being the older brother because he actually was killed, we tend after that, as soon as we start walking with God, well, then we have huge expectations about, how it should go for us compared to somebody else, or even I just have to say,
and we can begin looking down on other people. I've said repeatedly again in recent years, moral, spiritual superiority is the cancer of true religion, right?
and it has always
it kills
been.
everything. When we begin to think we're better or superior than any other human being, it's over.
Yeah, it has always been. And actually, the only people Jesus was really tough on were the religious people. That was it. He was never tough on the sinners. He was only tough on the religious people who thought they were so amazing and didn't need him, right? So yeah, for me, I think this is all part of the, part of the process is coming into this beautiful, humbling awareness that I will never have enough for you, Wade. I will never have enough for the people that come into my life. I will never be able to solve anybody's real problem the solution will last 10 years, but God can. And as I let him flow freely through my life, and you think of a flow through vessel, whether it's a straw or an electrical, cord or a pipe or anything, what it needs is a non-resistant conduit. If it has a non-resistant conduit, it can freely flow. And what we tend to do is we tend to be the resistance. We tend to be the resistance in the conduit. Maybe a little bit, you think about a heart valve, and if it's full of fat, if it's full of, it's getting blocked off and less blood is getting to that heart. Finally, there's a heart attack or a major event. That's how we are with God. When we get more and more of self in the way, more and more of, I'm going to do it, I can do it, I'm not going to do what God says, like that, less and less of God flows through us. And so we want to become that clean, clear, free-flowing vessel that he can just flow through. And when we do that, then not only do people get what they really need, which is him, not me, but also I am free to not worry so much. I've got two situations in my life right now where I'm praying constantly. I have a girl who's caught in human trafficking, who's, I'm in contact with her sometimes at midnight at night, when she has a moment where she can reach out. I have a group in Africa where because of the rioting, because of a wall being knocked down on their compound during the floods, they've been vandalized and the children are in danger. There's sometimes that things come in our minds, and what we want to do is we want to fix them. We want to solve it. And the beautiful thing of walking in this way with Christ is that I remember it's never about me. All I have to do is be God's flow through vessel when he asks, how he asks, with what he asks, and the rest of it is not my problem, not my responsibility. I would be more faithful if it didn't feel so irresponsible. And faithfulness is being a 4-year-old sitting on daddy's lap, not worrying about where the next meal is coming from, not worrying about the safety of my sweetheart, not worrying about the safety of the children. That's the joy. So I go free to love and serve God while he takes care of the big stuff that's out of that's above my pay grade.
Well, that's a beautiful place to end today's show.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go to a final commercial break. When we come back, it will be unfortunately just me going through some of the audience comments and picking out some to award a copy of Marnie's book, Flow Through Vessel. But I'm going to also do a quick pre-recorded segment of Marnie wrapping things up and saying goodbye to everyone. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Created in the Image of God with Marnie Swedberg. On to the final segment of tonight's show, Creating the Image of God with Marnie Swedberg. It's a little bittersweet. I really don't want to say goodbye to Marnie. And good news for me is she and I will have a chance to chat for a couple of minutes afterwards. The rest of you, you'll have to wait until she returns to the show for a date that we will announce in the future. But Marnie, what parting words would you like to leave with our audience that wraps up your messages for today?
I think the slogan of the book, Flow Through Vessel, is stop trying so hard and start trusting more. And I just encourage you that if it feels too hard to follow God, if life is too hard, you're doing too much of the heavy lifting. I have this picture on my screensaver, and it's this guy standing up under this huge boulder, and they photoshopped it enough so it looks like he's holding it up like Hercules or whatever. But
Atlas,
he could never, he could never do it. And so I have that come up every once in a while on my screensaver because I want to remember, if it feels too hard, it's because I'm doing too much of the heavy lifting. God wants to come in and help. And my favorite verse in the whole Bible, I have so many favorite verses, but my theme verse for life is 2 Corinthians 9:8 in the NIV, which says, God is able to make all grace abound toward you, so that in all things, at all times, having everything you need, you may abound in every good work. I love the superlatives, Wade. With me, I can do it some of the time pretty good, maybe okay. But with God, it's all, and it's abundant, and it's every time. And I can just rest in him to flow what's needed through me. But the most beautiful part of that is that he has to flow it to me first. I cannot give something I don't have. If I don't have peace, I can't give you some. If I don't have money, I can't give you some. If I don't have joy, I can't give you some. So the beautiful way he has this is he's not just like using us and abusing us. He's like blessing us so we can be a blessing.
Wonderful. Marnie, thank you so much. And we'll have you back soon. Everyone, I will quickly be sharing next week's show with you. But for Marnie, we're going to say goodbye for tonight. And thank you for your service, for letting God flow through you, and for, what was it? Mentoring millions, including a few more, hopefully, a couple of thousand viewers of this show tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. What a joy.
It was, in fact, an amazing joy meeting Marnie and recording that show. We don't yet have a date for her return, but we will be having her back on. There were many comments in the chat across our multiple channels. I don't know that it makes much sense to go through them without Marnie here, but I will just share this one here at the end from Barbara Ann Holmes. I'm glad I caught this, needed it tonight. So thank you, Marnie. Thank you to everyone who listened in. I have one more short duty, and that is to, well, we'll share this as well from Crackers. Just wait in. Can't wait to hear from her again. What a huge heart. Exactly. I don't know to what degree the audience felt it, but talking to her in the studio was an amazing, positive, uplifting experience. Next week, we'll have a different kind of guest, somebody who has actually been here before. And we had some technical difficulties the first time this guest was here. We did the show, and I think most people could hear it, but we weren't able to accomplish everything that we were hoping to because of the technical difficulties. So we're having this guest back on. His name is Payam Zamani. Payam Zamani is a refugee who fled from Iran and crossed the desert when he was a teenager and managed to get to the United States, where his brother was as well. And they founded a company which eventually took off, and they had an IPO valuing the company at over $1 billion. So Payam has an amazing story, and he wants to talk in more detail about spiritual principles in a materialistic nation. So we're going to go ahead and play a quick video about Payam Zamani's book, Crossing the Desert, and announce that he will be next week's guest. So you'll want to tune in again next week at 8 p.m. Central Time for Created in the Image of God, episode number 112 with Payam Zamani, Crossing the Desert. Check out this video.
1987, a young man embarked on a journey that would forever change his life. At just 16, Payam Zamani fled persecution in Iran, escaping through the perilous emptiness desert. 5 days of relentless heat, dry winds, and an unwavering will to survive. Against all odds, Payam made it to America. 12 years later, he and his brother had achieved what seemed impossible, a billion-dollar IPO on Wall Street. But success on paper couldn't shield him from the harsh lessons of modern capitalism. In 2015, Payam set out to redefine what it means to be an entrepreneur, founding One Planet Group, a company built on the principles of spiritual capitalism. One Planet Group proves that business can thrive while taking care of people, communities, and the planet. In Crossing the Desert, Payam shares his intimate journey, offering profound insights into the paths we choose and the values we hold dear. Discover how embracing life's most difficult journeys can lead to a brighter future, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Join Payam Zamani in Crossing the Desert, and let his story inspire your own journey of resilience and transformation. Get your copy today and start your own journey towards a brighter future.
So please tune in next week at 8 p.m. Central Time for Payam Zamani. And until then, have a wonderful week and keep spreading